So, if the 70s in your mind were say this moment of the new, which
well, it's not a moment. You're right. The constructivists were earlier. You know, I don't want to be pinned down like that.
Okay,
Don't try to solidify my cloud.
No, I'm sorry. That wasn't my intention. My question was going to be about the approach of somebody studying, somebody who works with performance studies in a large
scope.
Scope, and how does that make it different to be studying it today? If in the 70s, from what I hear, you feel like there was some kind of a struggle, the struggle that always accompanies any avant-garde or any feeling of there being something new.
In my department, most of the people are not studying theater at all. So the whole question of the avant-garde is irrelevant. They're not studying that.
Sensitivity. Right?
Well, if you look at performance studies, this is different. So Jose Munoz writes about queer identity. Andre Lepecki is very interested in dance philosophy, so he may be dealing with Jerome Bell and that kind of thing. Barbara Kirschenbach-Gimblett deals with performances of everyday life and supermarkets as well as museums. Diana Taylor deals with the archives of memory, and particularly in the Latin American context. I'm the only one that's really concerned with experimental performance within that field. The field is not about experimental performance mostly. It's about, let's call it social performance or ritual performance or identity performance, queer theater and African or African-American theater, Hispanic theater. There's a whole huge world out there of various ethnic and social and gendered and sexual identities that are performed and that are being studied by performance studies. The study of experimental performance art or installations is only a small part of what's being done, and very little of that kind of thing is done in my department. I'm directing dissertations now. One is on the judge shows on television. One is on Grotowski in Taiwan. One is actually two of them are on Grotowski. So those are historical. So the dialogue we're having here is my particular interest and your particular interest, but it is not the major interest of people doing performance studies.
Mm-hmm. But how does it differ, for instance, from anthropology or cultural studies?
Well, of course, you know that one of my books is called Between Theater and Anthropology. And one of my complaints, actually, is exactly what you've said, that I think that performance studies has drifted too close to cultural studies, and it's very hard to distinguish between performance studies and cultural studies, indeed. So my argument is that we have to pull performance studies back towards behavior, what the French call comportement, and not about theory. But you're quite correct. Performance studies and cultural studies are very hard to distinguish from each other now. And what happened was, of course, in the history of academia, which you may or may not be interested in the United States, English departments became cultural studies departments. In other words, literature gave way to the study of language in the Derridian sense. And then from there, how if rien dehors du texte, if there's nothing outside the text, then people began to study different kinds of social processes as various texts.
Wow.
So
we are like in television, when like something wrong with the voice. Say it again.
No, they want to have a commercial. So I think that when we got to the performance studies took off from speech acts and Austin, and also from anthropologists, from the structuralists and some post-structuralists. So, but we wanted to introduce not the idea of nothing is outside the text, but maybe Rien de hors la performance. Nothing is outside performance. What you were complaining about in saying it was so broad, well, what you were saying, but that would mean to locate it in behavior.
And we would like to ask you, because we are now in part of this kind of network system, or of creating a community, or not really community, how to say?
Yes, I would say
certain community of freelancers who have been dealing with performativity in different ways. And then
yes.
Tomasz Plata idea was to somehow gather us and to create a certain group that would exchange, you know. How would
right.
would you see such a networking, not only maybe in live, but also in internet, as this new certain community performance-based phenomenon?
I think so. The problem with the network, what we're doing, is that finally you can take up so much of your mental time networking, Facebooking, YouTubing, emailing, that you never do any work.
Well, this is
always,
our work.
You're always networking. So for me, I try to. It's not possible. Of course, I spend a lot of time on the web, but I try to do more face to face if I can, simply because, and to get time when nobody's bothering me. Because if I don't have alone time, I can't write. So the fact is that communicating is so technically easy, and there are good people all over the world. So all of a sudden, while 100 years ago people had 5 close friends, you know, Braque may have known Picasso, may have known whoever. Now we have 500 close friends, because anybody can email you, anybody can Skype you, anybody can say, hey, look at your wall on Facebook, or look at my video on YouTube, and all of a sudden we don't have time left. It's a peculiar thing. I thought I'd come here to Europe, and I'd be away from New York, and I'd have time to do some writing and thinking and walk the streets of Paris, and every minute is full. I love it, but I hate it at the same time. So I like the idea of what you're saying, but I also think one has to protect one's isolation.
I think what we are dealing with is this, that we start projects and we meet somebody, then we say, hey, let's do something together. But like 90% of these projects are never happening. So we are in a certain phenomenon of just having this compulsory will
yes.
to be starting
yes.
or engaging on some possibly not realized projects, you know.
Right.
And
well,
also
I'm lucky in the sense that I edit this journal, TDR, so I have to always make sure that there are 4 issues a year and that I select things. And I also direct plays, which I like to do. Because that puts me in a room with very few people, or in a space for a long period of time, and which I can say, don't bother me. We are going to be alone for a month or 2 months or 3 months, and I'm not going to answer my email. Just don't bother me. I like that. So I think we have to find the atelier where we can be alone with a few people, rather than skim along the top and be in brief encounters with very many people. At the same time, I recognize that my position may be an old-fashioned one. Maybe the way intimacy is evolving is into horizontal rather than vertical intimacy. Vertical intimacy would be deep with a few. Horizontal intimacy would be on the surface with many. It may yield the same thing, so it may be just a question of style. I admit that.